The world is changing fast, and not every country is rolling out the red carpet for American travelers in 2025. Whether it's due to political tensions, military conflicts, economic sanctions, or cultural clashes, these destinations are making it clear that U.S. citizens may not receive the warmest welcome. Are you planning a trip soon? You might want to double-check your destination before booking that flight. Today, we're diving into 15 countries where Americans are facing travel bans, visa difficulties, or outright hostility, and the reasons behind it. Some of these will shock you, so stick around until the end to find out which places you might want to avoid. 1. China. Relations between the U.S. and China are at their lowest point in decades, and in 2025 things are only getting worse. Trade disputes, military tensions, and technology bans have made diplomatic ties extremely fragile. The U.S. government has placed heavy restrictions on Chinese tech companies, increased military presence in the South China Sea, and imposed sanctions, leading China to retaliate with its own travel restrictions. For American travelers, visiting China is no longer as easy as it once was. Getting a visa is becoming increasingly difficult, with longer processing times and stricter requirements. Even those who do manage to enter the country may find themselves under heightened surveillance, as the Chinese government is tightening its grip on foreign visitors. Online access is also restricted, meaning many American apps and websites are blocked, making communication difficult. Public sentiment toward Americans is shifting as well. Anti-U.S. rhetoric has increased in state-run media. And while China remains a major global travel destination, American tourists may notice a colder reception. Any discussions about Taiwan, Hong Kong, or human rights issues could lead to serious trouble. If you were planning to visit the Great Wall, Shanghai, or Beijing, you might want to reconsider your plans, because in 2025, China is making it clear that it's not welcoming American tourists with open arms. 2. Russia. If there's one place that American travelers should absolutely avoid in 2025, it's Russia. Since the invasion of Ukraine, U.S.-Russia relations have deteriorated beyond repair, and the Russian government has labeled the U.S. as an unfriendly nation. Diplomatic tensions have led to visa denials, travel restrictions, and even the detainment of American citizens on suspicion of espionage. For those who do attempt to enter, the situation is far from welcoming. American visitors are often subjected to intense questioning at border control, and even a minor misunderstanding could lead to serious legal trouble. Authorities have cracked down on foreign journalists, business people, and tourists, accusing them of espionage or involvement in anti-government activities. The political climate has also fueled anti-American sentiment among the Russian population. Public protests against the West have become common, and American visitors may find themselves viewed with suspicion. Even in major tourist areas like Moscow and St. Petersburg, speaking English too loudly or engaging in political discussions could draw unwanted attention. While Russia boasts incredible cultural landmarks, from the Kremlin to the Red Square, it is far from a safe destination for Americans in 2025. Anyone considering a visit should seriously rethink their plans, because once you're there, your government may not be able to help if something goes wrong. 3. Iran. Iran has long been one of the least welcoming places for Americans, and in 2025, the situation has escalated even further. Relations between the two nations have been strained for decades, but recent sanctions, nuclear disputes, and diplomatic conflicts have pushed tensions to an all-time high. The Iranian government has accused the U.S. of economic warfare, blaming American policies for the country's financial struggles. As a result, they've placed severe restrictions on U.S. citizens, making it almost impossible for an American traveler to obtain a visa. Even those who manage to enter the country face an intense level of government scrutiny, with authorities monitoring their movements closely. Arrests of U.S. citizens in Iran have also been a growing concern. In the past, American travelers have been detained on vague charges of espionage, often without evidence, and the U.S. has no embassy in Iran to offer assistance. This means that if an American is arrested or faces legal trouble, there is virtually no way for their government to intervene. The political climate in Iran makes it one of the most dangerous destinations for Americans in 2025. While the country has a rich history and stunning architecture, the risks far outweigh the rewards. Travelers who ignore these warnings may find themselves caught in a geopolitical nightmare with no way out. 4. North Korea. North Korea has had a strict travel ban on Americans since 2017, and nothing has changed in 2025. The country remains one of the most closed-off and authoritarian regimes in the world, and Americans are completely prohibited from entering. The North Korean government views the U.S. as an enemy state, and past incidents involving detained U.S. citizens have led to even stricter policies. Several Americans who entered North Korea in the past, whether as tourists or on business, were imprisoned and used as political bargaining chips in negotiations with Washington. Even if the travel ban were lifted, it would still be one of the riskiest places for an American traveler. Foreign visitors are constantly watched, movements are heavily restricted, and even a minor offense like leaving a hotel without permission can result in imprisonment. North Korea's strict propaganda machine has also fueled anti-American sentiment among its people, making it unlikely that U.S. visitors would be welcomed with any sort of hospitality. The regime continues to use hostile rhetoric against the U.S., blaming Washington for economic sanctions and military tensions. For those who are even considering sneaking into North Korea, don't. The country has a zero-tolerance policy for Americans, and anyone caught trying to enter illegally will face severe consequences. In short, North Korea is off-limits, permanently. 5. Venezuela. Once a popular travel destination, Venezuela is now one of the most dangerous places for Americans. Years of economic collapse, political unrest, and diplomatic hostility have made it a hostile environment for U.S. visitors. The Venezuelan government, led by Nicolas Maduro, has blamed the U.S. for much of the country's economic downfall, citing American sanctions as the primary cause of inflation and resource shortages. In retaliation, Maduro's government has restricted visas for Americans and cut diplomatic ties with the U.S., making it extremely difficult for American travelers to receive any consular assistance. The crime rate in Venezuela is among the highest in the world, with kidnappings, armed robberies, and violent assaults being a constant threat. Tourists, especially Americans, are viewed as wealthy targets, and the lack of law enforcement makes it nearly impossible to get help in an emergency. Beyond crime, political tensions continue to rise. Anti-American protests have become increasingly violent, and U.S. citizens visiting Venezuela could easily become targets of hostility. The situation is so unstable that even Venezuelan citizens are fleeing the country in record numbers. For now, Venezuela is simply too dangerous for American travelers. Between the economic collapse, political instability, and crime surge, it is one of the worst places for U.S. citizens in 2025. 6. Cuba. For decades, U.S.-Cuba relations have been a roller coaster of diplomatic shifts, embargoes, and short-lived travel openings. In 2025, however, Cuba has made it clear that Americans are not as welcome as before. The re-implementation of harsh trade restrictions and travel bans by the U.S. government has severely strained relations between the two nations. One of the biggest issues is the ongoing U.S. embargo against Cuba, which has been in place since 1962. While previous administrations made efforts to ease restrictions, recent policy shifts have reversed those changes, limiting tourism, business interactions, and even remittances from Cuban Americans to family members on the island. This has fueled resentment among Cubans, who see American policies as the reason for their economic struggles and shortages. The Cuban government has responded by making visas for American tourists increasingly difficult to obtain, with added bureaucratic hurdles and long approval wait times. U.S. visitors may also face increased scrutiny from local authorities, and certain businesses refuse to serve Americans altogether. Anti-American sentiment has been rising in recent years, with protests against U.S. policies becoming more common. While Cuba's beaches, historic sites, and vibrant culture remain attractive, the political climate is making it a more difficult and uncomfortable destination for American tourists. Those who still choose to visit should avoid discussing politics, embargoes, or economic hardships to avoid unwanted confrontations. 7. Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has been a longtime ally of the United States, but that doesn't mean Americans are feeling welcome in 2025. Diplomatic tensions over oil production, human rights violations, and arms deals have strained the relationship between Washington and Riyadh, leading to an increase in restrictions for U.S. travelers. One of the biggest issues is U.S. criticism of Saudi Arabia's human rights record, particularly its treatment of dissidents, journalists, and women. The U.S. government has imposed sanctions and travel restrictions on Saudi officials, and in response, Saudi Arabia has tightened visa regulations for Americans. Additionally, Saudi Arabia has been working to strengthen ties with other global powers, including China and Russia, shifting away from its traditional reliance on U.S. partnerships. This geopolitical shift has made American travelers less of a priority, and many locals are beginning to question the long-term value of maintaining close ties with the U.S. For those who do visit, Saudi Arabia's strict cultural laws remain in place. Travelers must dress modestly, follow local customs, and avoid public discussions about politics or religion. While Americans aren't outright banned, the overall attitude toward U.S. visitors is becoming noticeably less friendly. 8. Turkey. Turkey is a country rich in history and culture, but in 2025, it's becoming an increasingly difficult place for Americans to visit. NATO disputes, arms deals with Russia, and tensions in Syria have caused relations between Washington and Ankara to deteriorate. One major issue is Turkey's decision to purchase Russian-made missile defense systems, which led to the U.S. imposing sanctions on Turkish officials and kicking Turkey out of the F-35 fighter jet program. In response, Turkey has tightened restrictions on American visitors, with longer visa processing times and increased security screenings for U.S. passport holders. Anti-American sentiment has also been rising, fueled by Turkey's frustration with U.S. military support for Kurdish groups in Syria, which the Turkish government considers a threat. American tourists may find themselves subject to additional questioning by Turkish authorities and should avoid engaging in any political discussions. Despite its breathtaking landscapes, historic mosques, and unique blend of European and Middle Eastern culture, Turkey is not as welcoming to Americans as it once was. Those visiting should stick to tourist-friendly areas and be prepared for potential hostility in politically charged conversations. 9. Afghanistan. Since the U.S. withdrawal in 2021, Afghanistan has been under Taliban control, and in 2025, it remains one of the most dangerous places in the world for American travelers. The Taliban government does not recognize American influence, and relations between Washington and Kabul remain hostile. For American visitors, obtaining a visa is nearly impossible, and those who enter risk detainment, kidnapping, or worse. The Taliban government enforces strict laws and heavy surveillance on all foreigners, making it an extremely unsafe environment. Western influence is being erased, and Americans are particularly at risk of being targeted by extremist groups. The U.S. does not have an embassy in Afghanistan, meaning there is no consular assistance available if something goes wrong. Even experienced travelers and journalists are warned not to enter Afghanistan under any circumstances, as the risk of being taken hostage remains extremely high. 10. Pakistan-U.S.-Pakistan relations have always been complicated, and in 2025, the situation is growing even more tense. Geopolitical disputes, military tensions, and accusations of U.S. interference have caused anti-American sentiment to rise significantly. Pakistan has been strengthening ties with China and Russia while distancing itself from the U.S. Many Pakistanis view America's past military operations in the region as damaging and exploitative, and public opinion has become increasingly hostile toward American visitors. Visa approval for Americans has become a lengthy and uncertain process, with increased scrutiny on U.S. passport holders. In major cities like Islamabad and Karachi, Americans may face suspicion from locals, and discussing U.S. policies on military operations or foreign aid is strongly discouraged. Pakistan remains a complex and often unstable destination, and while it boasts incredible natural beauty and historic sites, American travelers should be aware of the risks involved. 11. Nicaragua. Nicaragua is one of Latin America's least welcoming countries for Americans in 2025. President Daniel Ortega's government has taken an increasingly authoritarian turn, cracking down on dissent, restricting foreign visitors, and blaming the U.S. for economic struggles. U.S. citizens attempting to enter Nicaragua face intense questioning at border control, and some have been denied entry for unclear reasons. The political climate is hostile, and many locals believe American influence is part of Nicaragua's instability. Travel advisories strongly warn against visiting Nicaragua, and American tourists should expect difficulties if they choose to enter. 12. Syria. Syria remains one of the most dangerous places in the world for American travelers. The country is still in a state of conflict, and the Assad government does not welcome U.S. visitors. For Americans, getting a visa is nearly impossible, and those who do enter face serious risks, including detainment and violence. The U.S. has no diplomatic presence in Syria, meaning there is no support in case of an emergency. Even humanitarian workers are strongly advised against traveling to Syria, as Westerners are often targeted by militant groups and hostile government forces. 13. Sudan. Political instability, economic struggles, and hostility toward the U.S. make Sudan a risky destination for Americans in 2025. The Sudanese government has accused the U.S. of meddling in its affairs, and anti-American protests have become more common. Travel restrictions are tightening, and security risks remain high. For American travelers, Sudan is not a safe place to visit, as the risk of detainment or violence is increasing. 14. Greenland. Greenland, the vast Arctic land of glaciers, polar bears, and untouched wilderness, has had a tense relationship with the U.S. ever since Donald Trump casually suggested buying it back in 2019. At the time, Denmark, which owns Greenland, and Greenlandic officials laughed it off, calling it absurd. But in 2025, some American politicians are reviving the idea, and Greenland is not amused. The renewed push for U.S. influence in Greenland is mainly driven by its strategic location in the Arctic and its vast, untapped natural resources. The U.S. has been increasing pressure to establish more military presence on the island, and Greenlanders see this as yet another example of American overreach. Many locals view U.S. interests in Greenland as exploitative, fearing that their environment and independence could be threatened. Greenland has a strong relationship with Denmark and the European Union, and its people prefer sustainable development over foreign resource extraction. Because of this, Greenland has made it increasingly difficult for Americans to obtain work permits, long-term visas, and even some types of tourist access. If you're visiting Greenland in 2025, expect a colder reception than the Arctic weather, especially if you bring up the U.S. buying the place. Tourists are still allowed, but many Greenlanders resent the idea that their homeland is viewed as just another American asset. 15. Germany. Germany, known for its world-class beer, precision engineering, and rich history, has long been a favorite destination for American travelers. But in 2025, the political tensions between Washington and Berlin are making things more uncomfortable for U.S. visitors. One major source of friction? NATO spending and defense policies. Donald Trump has repeatedly criticized Germany for not contributing enough to NATO's defense budget, and Germans aren't happy about being lectured by the U.S. To them, the idea that America is doing all the heavy lifting for Europe's security is both insulting and misleading. Another key point of disagreement is trade. The U.S. has imposed tariffs on German cars, claiming that BMWs and Mercedes are hurting American automakers. Germany, of course, finds this ridiculous, and many see it as an example of America's economic hypocrisy. While Americans are not banned from Germany, tourists might notice that the friendly and open attitude once enjoyed has cooled. Expect longer visa processing times, more security screenings, and a bit more side-eye from locals when discussing politics. If you plan on visiting in 2025, enjoy the castles, beer halls, and autobahns, but maybe avoid talking about NATO, trade, or Trump unless you want to get into a debate over schnitzel. 16. France. France, the land of wine, romance, and world-class cuisine. But in 2025, it's also a place where Americans might find less of that warm, welcoming Parisian charm. One of the biggest issues straining relations is NATO disputes. Trump has accused France of not contributing enough to military defense, and French leaders have pushed back, saying they won't be bullied by Washington. Then there's the climate change divide. The French take environmental issues very seriously, and America's on-again, off-again commitment to climate agreements has been a sore point. France sees itself as a global leader in sustainability, while the U.S. has been accused of prioritizing corporate profits over climate action. And of course, there's always been a bit of French snobbery toward American tourists. But in 2025, that attitude is getting even frostier. Service in restaurants might feel even slower, and locals might not be as patient when you ask, "Do you speak English?" If you're heading to France in 2025, you'll still be able to enjoy the Eiffel Tower, the Louvre, and croissants. But don't be surprised if Parisians have less patience for loud, demanding American tourists. 17. Canada. Our polite northern neighbor has always been one of the easiest places for Americans to visit. But in 2025, things have taken a colder turn. One major issue? Trade wars. The U.S. has been imposing tariffs on Canadian exports like steel, aluminum, and even maple syrup, claiming that Canada is taking advantage of American trade policies. In response, Canada has hit back with tariffs of its own, and the mood at the border hasn't been the same since. Another problem? Climate change policies. Canada is taking major steps toward reducing fossil fuel reliance, while the U.S. has been seen as dragging its feet. This has led many Canadians to view America as a bad neighbor that isn't doing its part to protect the planet. And then there's the Justin Trudeau situation. Trump has had plenty of harsh words for the Canadian Prime Minister, and many Canadians have not forgotten or forgiven. Americans are not banned from Canada, but expect more border questioning, less warmth from locals, and maybe even a few smug looks from Canadians when they hear your accent. 18. Mexico. Mexico has long been one of the top destinations for American tourists. But in 2025, tensions are rising, and some locals are growing tired of American visitors. For years, immigration policies, border wall debates, and trade disputes have made relations between the U.S. and Mexico increasingly hostile. Many Mexicans feel that the U.S. treats them unfairly, constantly pushing harsher immigration laws while still expecting cheap labor and easy trade. American tourists still flood destinations like Cancun, Tulum, and Mexico City, but locals are less patient with loud, entitled visitors who treat their country like a cheap playground. There's also a rise in Mexican nationalism, with more people rejecting American influence and tourism-driven gentrification. If you're planning to visit Mexico in 2025, be respectful, speak some Spanish, and don't assume every local is eager to serve you. The margaritas are still flowing, but the welcome might not be as warm. 19. Panama, known for its stunning beaches, modern skyline, and one very famous canal, has long been a hotspot for American retirees and expats. But in 2025, anti-American sentiment is growing, largely because of renewed U.S. interest in the Panama Canal. Some American politicians have been hinting at the idea that the U.S. should have more control over the canal again, which did not sit well with Panamanians. After decades of U.S. interference, Panama is proud of its independence and does not want Washington meddling in its affairs. While Americans can still visit, there's a noticeable shift in attitude. Many locals feel that American expats drive up the cost of living, and businesses in certain areas are less eager to cater to U.S. tourists. So, if you're visiting Panama in 2025, enjoy the rainforests, beaches, and skyscrapers, but maybe leave your "Make the Canal American Again" hat at home. 20. Bolivia. Bolivia's leftist government has grown increasingly anti-American, imposing visa restrictions and accusing the U.S. of economic interference. U.S. citizens face longer visa wait times and stricter entry requirements. While Bolivia's natural beauty remains breathtaking, the political climate is making it a more challenging destination for American visitors in 2025. And that's the 20 countries that won't welcome Americans in 2025. Some of these are due to political disputes, military conflicts, or economic tensions, while others just don't want American tourists. Which one surprised you the most? Let me know in the comments, hit like, and subscribe for more eye-opening travel insights.